So, welcome back, everybody. We are pleased to continue today in the Shaykh of Emunah, as we mentioned last week, and namely the week before when we began Shaykh of Emunah, about this entire segment, the uniqueness of this segment, despite 12 chapters in total, but the entire segment bringing out something enormous within us, and namely bringing us really into this very important spirit of Hashem Echad. Again, as we mentioned a few times in the last two classes, again, namely as we began this segment, and it's not. This is pretty much the Avodah of the Yid, the Emes Hashem La'elam, to introduce the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. For that matter, this is, we say it, Pamayim B'chol Yom, and more than that even, before davening also, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad is really the symbol of the Yid. The Yid's Avodah in this world, the Yid's service in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to introduce the Hashem Elokeinu, Kecheinu V'chayuseinu, our Koyach, our life force, our energy, and name ultimately Hashem Echad, that the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is manifest in the entire world in the Zayin Rikim and Aretz, which is the Ches, corresponding to the Ches, and then the Dalet, the four corners of the world. The Elokus, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, saturates the entire world by Hashem Melech HaKol HaOretz. Hashem Echad U'Shmei Echad, or as Rashi says in this very pasuk of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, it's about the world one day, all the Amim, all the nations of the world, and more so. When we say in davening, that it will be manifest not only in all mankind but in the entire world, will demonstrate the Hashem Echad. So as we mentioned again, that this whole segment brings us into the spirit. In order to bring it out into the entire world, we ourselves have to be, it has to penetrate our system and our spirit. And this whole Shaykh B'Emunah, the entire segment again of these 12 chapters, bring us in, really bring us in, not only to know about it, but we become part of that spirit of Hashem Echad. Again, as we mentioned towards the beginning, before we began Perek Aleph. So we're holding Perek Beis, which is the second chapter of Shaykh B'Emunah. So the original text is page Ayin Zayin, and then you can see it in the following English text. As we mentioned, as we usually mention, you could see this on the TanyaOnline.com, the previous classes, that is Shaykh B'Emunah, and for that matter, the entire Likutei Amarim, which we concluded recently. You could see it on this TanyaOnline, oneword.com website, or wherever you're watching it. Ultimately, the benefit, as we mentioned, namely for newcomers, the benefit of this website, there's a separate scroll bar you can follow independently. In other words, it's in a separate scroll bar which you can use in order to follow with the text as you follow with the class, wherever you're learning Shaykh B'Emunah, wherever you're learning Tanya, Kay L'Chay, blessing and blessing unto you, because as we spoke about this so many times, it's not just Tanya, it's not just another sefer, it's something of a Be'ein Areich, the information conveyed by this holy sefer Tanya is something Be'ein Areich, it's a different idea, and in this case, the uniqueness of the Hashem Echad, the way it's becomes demonstrable by the Shaykh B'Emunah, is something extremely unique. So we begin Perek Beis. V'hinei mikan tshuvas haminim. Mikan tshuvas haminim. What's mikan? From where? From this which we just learned last week. What do we know about we learned last week? It's a click away. We're not going to take time to explain, but in very quickly, it's the fact that everything, and it's important to get the spirit of the Perek Aleph to appreciate Perek Beis. And he says, Mikan, from all this that I explained in Perek Aleph. So we're not going to go through everything in Perek Aleph again. It's literally a click away. Last week's class, the class before, in other words, totaling the entire Perek Aleph. What is the message, in a nutshell, is from the fact that everything is mishaba or mischaya. Everything it gets its life force and energy from the Asarim Amores, which Hashem created the world. It wasn't Hashem created the world then, and then it remains in its place, the entire world, from the Sheshis Mebereshis, 6 days of creation. No, but that Hashem continues to vitalize all the Olamis, this very world. Every item in this world is right now being vitalized by the energy of the Asarim Amores. As we mentioned, again, as Dr. Rebbe explained, the 10 sayings are energy, their combination, their configuration. This is all, and therefore, as such, the names given to every created being. There's something intrinsic of the name with that created being, because that's the life force and energy which creates that and makes that appear and look and function exactly the way it does. As again, we elaborate on this, the famous Medrash, which tells us about the Eibishter brought everything to Adam Arish, and he said, and so on. However, the Medrash, the animals and the created beings, the creations which Adam Arish named, the message is that it's these names, these words of the Asarim Amoris, that is the energy which constantly gives life and energy to these creations, to these created entities. And without it, they don't have an existence. And if Hashem would stop pumping this creation, it wouldn't be a Mechadesh B'Tovei B'chol Yom. Literally, every moment Hashem is saying Yehi, and Hashem is saying Yehi Eir, and so on and so forth. However, it's expressed in this 10 Maimoris in Parshas Bereshis. And that's why this continues to exist, this item, that item, the grander, the smaller, the minute, every single part of the Bria, every Eilam, every world, but in this Eilam, every single part of the Bria it continues to receive its life and energy based on the Pasuk, Eilam Vashem Dvorach Nitza B'Shamayim. And it's not just once Hashem created the world, Asarim Amaris, but these Dvarim, these Asarim Amaris, these sayings, right? Hashem spoke creation into being. Vayemer Elikim, and again, the 10 Ma'amaris, these saying, these words, these ices, these letters, this Dvorcho is Nitzav, presently is there, Bashamayim, in heaven, and in every part of creation. It's La'elim, it's eternal, in every single moment. Hashem pumps his energy into creation, for if Hashem would stop even for a moment, that would turn, if it's from that particular item, that would turn into a state of nothingness, complete nothingness, the way it was prior to Hashem creating the world and ultimately creating that creation. And so too in the world in its totality, or it's the Shemayim Da'aretz, if Hashem would pull back, it wouldn't be just like a broken Aretz, a broken Shemayim, whatever it is, or look different, desolate, and so on. It just would not be. To nothing is nothing at all. And therefore, it's the chayas of Hashem's, these Asis, and as Dr. conclude last week's chapter, where is the chayas, the energy of the Asarim Amaris, what is in with them that they have the ability to create the world in the very beginning of the Sheshis Mebereshis, 6 days of creation, and to continue to create on a constant basis, is because this is a Raisa Kuchubricha Kulachad, because they're Asis of Torah. The Asarim Amaris is the Asis of Torah, right? Bereshis Tam Maimer, who you have the 10 sayings in the Parshas Bereshis itself, because in Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, so all that infinite energy is embedded in Torah. So these Asis have this infinite energy, and therefore they have the ability to create. So Mikan, from all this, from this very message, Tshuva, some meaning, we have the respond to those who are heretics. And Vigili Shoirish Ta'usam, HaKoifrim Bashkocha Protis, and the discovery of the source, the root of their error, as they would negate in the divine providence. They would deny and negate the message of divine providence, HaKoifrim Bashkocha Protis, and in signs and in wonders of the Torah. Yetzias Mitzrayim is a wonder. It's a nes. It's a miracle. It's a sign. These are terminologies used in these very psukim verses which speak about, which relate of the Hashem's miracles and wonders and signs which He performed in Mitzrayim. So He says this, that water becomes blood. The North Kriyas Yamsuf, for example, that 2 million people, give or take, were able to, maybe more, were able to walk by the Kriyas Yamsuf as the water turned into Yabosha, into dry land. These are wonders in Torah. In other words, they deny additional to the Hashgacha Pratis, the divine providence, but they also deny in the wonders and in the signs of Torah. And why is it? What's the basis of their heresy? What's the basis of their denial? They err with their imaginary, false imagination. As they equate the actions of God, the maker of heaven and earth, like the actions of man, of the human being, and Tachbalaisov, and all his, many times Tachbalaisov is used in the context of Tachbulis, B'nei Adam, conspiracies. But man, the establishment and the doings of man is what they equate the Hashem's doings, which is Eisei Shemayim Va'aretz, the actions of Hashem, the maker of heaven and earth. And this is the root of their error. They say, what do you mean Hashem performed this miracle in Egypt, or Kriyas Yamsuf? This water was there back when Hashem created the world. Yeah, they don't deny Hashem created the world. Hashem created the world in the 6 days of creations, and then you went to do other things. Busy as a whole lot of things, a lot of stuff to do. For that matter, it's interesting. It says, what does the Eibishter do after He created the world? He says the Eibishter is Yeshiv Mezavik Zivugim. He's sitting and making shidduchim. So it is a concept that the 6 days of creation was the formal time Hashem created the world, but nonetheless, this is they say that once Hashem created the world, Hashem just let things go. Once He created them, they are, and they're there to stay, and therefore there's no intervention or direct connection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His creation. Maybe He's in charge, He's the one, you created something, especially HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which created such a sophisticated world. Obviously, the world belongs to Him, but nonetheless, to say His particular involvement, it probably is, He gets involved in the big stuff, but that specific involvement in the way it's expressed with the most minute details within creation. They say, what does God have to do with creation? He created the world, now He's into other stuff. And so too when you say Hashem performed at that exact moment when Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, was threatened by the Egyptians, which were cornering them at that point, exactly the water split, Hashem was really involved. I mean, that demonstrates the direct connection on a constant basis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in His world. This happened over 2,000 years after Hashem created this world. Hashem got very busy in 2,000 years. What's the connection? Hashem in His world, to say that Hashem is performing miracles, turning blood into water, and so on. And that is the basis, that is the predicate of their error, that they equate the maker of heaven and earth, Hashem's actions, and Hashem's involvement in creating, as the creator, to the makings of man. And this is pretty much the way it is when man produces any production, makes something, for example, a becher, let's say, which means a goblet. He takes the metal and he puts together a beautiful, this beautiful becher, as an example, this beautiful goblet, or as an example, and puts it together, and pretty much he's on to other things. Yeah, is there somewhat of an emotional connection with, or somewhat of a connection to his production? Probably is, because he took time and he invested in it. This is his pride, and especially dealing with sophisticated craftsmen. When they put together something, they put their entire heart and soul, and therefore somewhat there's a connection, but they go on. They move on to the next thing. And for that matter, as mortal human beings, they move on as they're moving on. They move on. Is there a connection, that production with them, additional to that, besides that somewhat psychological or emotional connection, which it is and probably fades away with time? There isn't. So they say the same thing. Hashem obviously got very much connected with his world. It's a sophisticated, complex world, and he created it. But then he moves on. If he moves on, the connection fades away. And this is, again, the premise. This is the basis for their heresy, their denying of that direct, you say, divine providence. Hashem is directly connected with everything with his creation. And if Hashem performs a miracle, a sign, a wonder at that precise time, that precise situation, that shows that there is beyond just a emotional or some type of a psychological connection with your creation. That shows you're completely present on a constant basis. They can't make that. They can't. They don't establish that. And to the contrary, in their mind, they establish the connection between and the similarity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem, and any other craftsman which produces any type of a production. So this is the way it truly is by the craftsman. When he puts together a utensil, shuv eina kli tzarich de'atzed, if it doesn't need it anymore, it's independent of him. In other words, the keli, this utensil, doesn't need the craftsman anymore. Even though his hands are removed from it, again, so different than the way we learned in Perek Aleph, that Hashem is constantly connected to creation. He's constantly pumping life in creation, which is, again, demonstrates the dependability of the creation, of the created entity, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with that life force and energy. And he says, no, and again, the premise of their era, they equate it to the way it is by the tzedif, by this craftsman, that even though his hands are completely removed from it, and he goes on his way. Bashuk literally means in the market or the street. He goes on his way. The keli, the utensil, remains intact and remains in its complete in its image and in its form. He doesn't have to be there to constantly and not only observe and overlook that it should remain intact, that it shouldn't fall apart. He certainly doesn't have to, again, create it and put it together on a constant basis, that if he would walk away or he'd avert his attention from it, it would fall apart or maybe even disappear. It's not like that, as we all know. He can go on his way, and the utensil remain in its full tact, in its full image, and its full form. In exactly the same time when he was done producing this utensil. So too, this foolish approach, again, these sichlim, and those who carry that foolish approach, they equate the actions of heaven and earth in the same fashion. Hashem created his creation in the first 6 days of creation, and Hashem created the entire world, is the entire creation in the very first days, 6 days, where Hashem created the world in these very first days, 6 days of creation, and then Hashem walks away. So why the dependability of the creation within HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Similar to the non-dependability which exists in the utensil, in the production of the craftsman with the craftsman. And this becomes the premise of their error. And he says, now we can understand what once you know that the opposite is so true, then we can appreciate Hashgacha Pratis. Obviously there's Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, wonders and miracles of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides so. Obviously Hashem is right there within creation. Creation doesn't stand a chance with HaKadosh Baruch Hu being there, not only being there, so to say, is servicing creation. Remember we spoke about this last week, something is a sophisticated machine, needs periodic servicing. No, it's beyond that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to constantly pump creation, recreate, bring creation into being on a constant basis. So to say divine providence, it's not just he's coming from somewhere in a split second, in a blink of an eye, to deal with something. And because he's God, he knows how to go from one place to the other, from one focus to the other within seconds. Hashem, time is not something which would disturb HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's involved in that, and he can jump into this. and as such there is a connection of creator and creation. No, it's beyond that. It's not that Hashem just decides whenever He wants to focus into creation. Again, the phenomena, the concept, the notion of Hashgacha Pratis. But Hashem is there on a constant basis, because if Hashem would not pump creation into being every single second, creation would disappear, literally non-exist. And again, as we expanded on this concept, as Alter Rebbe expanded on this concept in the very first chapter, and therefore the connection of creator to creation, it's beyond connection. And this is what Alter Rebbe goes on. They're blind. Their eyes are covered from seeing and identifying the great difference between man's makings and man's involvements. Shu yesh mi yesh, which is something from something, not yesh mi ayin. He says, Alter Rebbe says, go back to the very beginning. Right? Remember this famous expression, someone, especially with modern technology, says, God, I figured it all out, and I can do the same. As technology has brought so many novelties into this world and beyond, as we know, and turns to God and He says, okay, you were kind of the great God till now, but look what we accomplished through technology. I'll just take a little bit sand and look what I can do from sand, and again, as we know, just a few molecules, you could the greatest positive and negative productions comes about, especially again with technology. And Hashem turns to him and says, so where are you getting the sand? Where does the sand come from? Because in the end of the day, whatever we will ever produce is taking something and turning it to something else, changing the form into another form. In this case, for example, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about the craftsman putting together this beautiful golden goblet, as an example, he's taking metal which pre-existed and he's just changing the form. That's it. So what's the pella? What's the wonder that he can walk away? There's no connection between him and that material. Material could have been existed and probably did exist before he was ever born, before he ever came onto the scene. So he took something which pre-existed him and he just put it together, and now it's a beautiful goblet. Granted, compliment him, did a great job. He demonstrated his talents in that formation of that goblet, so there's some type of a connection with him and the goblet, and again, because he invests time and energy, and therefore this is some type of a psychological and emotional connection to the goblet, granted, but that fades away because in the onset there was never a connection between him and that piece of gold, for example, or metal. That existed prior to him coming to. So he took yesh, he took something, and he made a yesh. He made this goblet mi yesh from something which pre-existed. Actually, Mishana Tzur Vatmuna, he just changes the form, it just changes the image. Mei Tmunos Chatichas Kesef, from the image of a silver clay, piece of clay, the silver. From a piece of silver, litmunas keli, to an image of a utensil. Compare that l'maisa shamayim va'aretz to the actions and the making of heaven and earth. Shu yesh mi ayin. Hashem took something, brought something into being from a state of nothingness, ex nihilo, which tells us that in the end of the day, this has no chance, by definition, there's no dependability of this yesh, only to that ayin. It did not exist before, and Hashem brings it into existence, and because Hashem brings it into existence, it's beyond dependability. Its whole mere existence is because of the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if it's because of the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu must constantly pump this energy to allow that to exist. So it's not only just divine providence that Hashem could tune into any reality of Ilam Hazeh, all the Ilamas, and as we talk about Ilam Hazeh at any given whim of a moment, because He's God, nothing takes time. It's beyond that, because Hashem is there on a constant basis, never left. because the state of the world is not only, again, Hashem establishing something, but he established it from nothing. It didn't exist, and based on what we learned, it wasn't meant to exist. Where do we have a finite world in the face of an infinite creator? The whole idea that it exists is one big wonder. So even when it does exist somewhat, it really doesn't, because where does the spirit of finitude come about in the spirit of infinity? And it does, it's not like it has its own source. The source of the kind of the finite source and the infinite source. Well, somewhat it does agree with it. It does exist within a HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus, but in the end of the day, it's one HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So where does a finite world or anything associated with finitude connected or come from an infinite God, which remains infinite even after he creates a finite world? The whole thing is a chidush, it's a novelty. And again, going back to the example which we gave the other day of taking, for example, a ball which usually gravitates downwards, like everything else gravitates downwards. This is the nature, again, to the exclusion of fire and similar, but everything gravitates downwards, and you take that ball and you throw it upwards. You're doing something which is opposite of the very nature of that ball, and therefore the whole reason why it's going in an opposite direction other than what it's naturally gravitated to is because the energy you're pumping into that ball, and therefore the moment your energy subsides, the moment your energy, so to say, is removed from the ball, you'll see. Look at the ball; it'll slow down, come to a full stop, and then gravitate to its origin, to where it naturally gravitates to, because it's so opposite than the very nature of the ball. And so too, the whole fact that there is a creation is just beyond the opposite. Where does a creation come in the face of an infinite God? I say infinite God, not in the face of creator, because the whole, as famous Mekubal said, the fact that Eibush is called a Boirei gets involved in creation, so to say, it's a Yerida, it's a descent from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way Hashem is Bechveide V'atzmei, Hashem is Ein Sof. So the mere fact that the creation comes into being is just an opposite than things were meant to be, if you will. So that Hashem decides to create something, a state from Yesh, a state of Yesh Mei Ayin, so that Ayin has to constantly be there, again similar to the energy within the ball, has to constantly be there in order to establish a situation when the ball is doing opposite than its very nature. And so too Hashem creates something from nothing, totally from nothing, and Hashem establishes that this should be, this is this tells us again that Hashem constantly has to make sure that it is, and it is again, it is again. It doesn't turn to the state of original nothingness, state of non-existent. So for that matter, I'm just adding this Yesh Mi Ayin, so the Alter Rebbe doesn't speak about right now that it's opposite than the way it's meant to be, but really it stands as the backdrop of the whole phenomenon of Yesh Mi Ayin. Here the Alter Rebbe speaks about the dependability of Olam to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's Yesh Mi'ayin. He didn't take something which existed and just change the form, change the image. He's bringing it from a state of nothingness into something, and therefore the nothing, the Ayin, in other words, the state of Ayin rather, into Yesh. So that state of Ayin into Yesh it has to always be there. And again, on top of that, the backdrop of that is that the fact that it's there, it's one big chidush. Again, this is what we connect to that example. The fact the ball is going the opposite direction, when you threw it up, it doesn't become this flying ball indefinite flying ball. It's just because you infused a certain energy into the ball. The moment that energy dissipates, the ball will go back to its very nature. Because again, there's and therefore the ball going in its opposite direction is totally dependent. Every single second is dependent on the energy invested in the ball. Because balls don't ascend. They don't go upwards. Everything gravitates downwards. So it's every second that the ball is going in the opposite direction is because of the energy which you're infusing, which was infused into the ball. And the moment that energy which was imbued into the ball, again, minimizes and eventually it dissipates completely, eventually the ball will stop and go back to its original, because again it's totally dependent, because it didn't become a flying ball on its own when you decided to throw it upwards. And so too the whole creation, the fabric of creation, comes from a state of ayin. Hashem created it. So it's not something which was there, existed prior to the craftsman's involvement. And again, it could have been existing before he was ever born. So why should he? What's the connection between him and that clump, the lump of clay or the lump of silver? There's no connection. It started with being independent from him, and it continues to be independent from him. And even if he takes it and demonstrates his pride to put together this beautiful goblet, so again, there's some type of a connection, but to say there's the dependability of it, why should it be dependent on him? It was there before he came around. As opposed to the creation of heaven and earth, it's totally dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it was not around. And Hashem established it, became a yesh me'ayin, from a state of the pre-state of the yesh, which the yesh did not exist. Which again, by definition, is it leads to that total dependability of every part of creation within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, again, you say total dependability, so Hashem has to constantly create and say, yes, you are. In other words, Hashem is creating b'chol yom tov. Every moment, Hashem pumps that same energy, which He pumped into creation, the time of creation, which is the 6 days of creation, with the same asar mamaris on a constant basis. And Alter Rebbe continues, it's even a greater wonder than the splitting of the Red Sea. What's the connection? Derech Moshel, if you look in the pasuk, what happened when Hashem split the Red Sea? There was kind of I wouldn't call it really a natural evolution, because the whole Kriyas Yam is a great miracle on its own. Understandably, it's a great miracle. Hashem performed is actually one of the greatest miracles of all times. But if you look in the verse in the pasuk, there was a kind of evolution that very night, how things developed. Things developed in a way that Hashem took a few steps till eventually the waters are split. So when you look into the pasuk, it's not that it doesn't say that Am Yisrael came to the waters and all of a sudden they split. It says that Haylech Hashem es hayam b'ruach kodim azo kol halayla, that Hashem blew the towards the waters with a eastern wind, and how not a regular eastern wind, but Azah. This is a quotation of the pasuk in the parsha, in the portion of Kriyas Yamsuf, in the splitting of the Red Sea, that Hashem brought Hashem Heilich. He pushed the waters with an intense eastern wind an entire night, and Vayivaku Hamayim, when it came the time that the waters to split, when Am Yisrael needed to go through, at that point they split. V'nitzvu k'meineid u'kechayma, and they stood as a upright in their upright posture and as a wall. Okay, so we see over here that in order for that to happen, so to say, Hashem had to, or in order for that to happen, the pasuk testifies that Hashem blew an intense wind an entire night. And that intense wind, and obviously you're not talking about a regular wind, you're talking about an intense wind, and a very methodically, so I say, planned by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that wind should have enough energy to take something which usually flows, like the water, which then Am Yisrael wouldn't stand a chance, again, naturally, because they have the waters in front of them, and this was, again, the strategy of the Egyptians to corner them, that they can't proceed further. And then, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam Pari, with all his vengeance at that particular juncture in time, as we build up, as we walk through the Kriyas, the story of Parshas B'Shalach, again, of Pari regretting the fact that he sends in Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, so now he corners them, so waters flow, so then Am Yisrael is stuck. But Hashem decides to make this miracle that Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, is able to cross the water. How do you cross the water? The water turned into dry land, and then eventually Hashem put it back to its state when the Egyptians were in the water and they drowned. That's the story in a nutshell of Kriyas Yamsuf. But the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew a wind. In other words, he established an intense eastern wind, which went focused straight, arrowed straight at the water, focused straight at the water in the exact place where Am Yisrael needed to go by, and it blew an entire night. And when the time came when Am Yisrael had to go by, so then it ultimately split. In other words, the wind became more and more intense, and the water split, and Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, was able to go by. So what we see over here is that there was something pumping into that water. There was a wind, intense wind pumping and blowing at that water, which took water, which usually flows, and again, if it flows, you don't stand a chance to cross a flowing river or flowing sea, and it made it dry, le'abasha. And again, there was additional miracles, the way, again, to the extent how much everything was dry, as the Medrash tells us, that it was extremely pleasant. It wasn't that they were, so to say, tumbling into just saving themselves with the last, someone saves himself, and especially he has to go through a terrain of mud and so on. The Medrash says it was extremely pleasant walk, but again, these are additional miracles that Hashem performed, but the fact that the waters were able to dry up and stand like a wall, namely, again, these floating waters was able to stand like a wall. The Torah doesn't say that Hashem just took water and made it into a wall. You look in the parsha, it says Hashem established a very intense eastern wind an entire night, and that blew against the water, and eventually the water stood up like a wall. So if you look at the pasuk, that tells us that if Hashem would stop that wall that wind, for one moment, what would have been? The waters would go back and flow the way they usually do, vitivam, the way their nature, they follow their nature, which is to flow, and it would not stand like a wall, without a doubt. And again, what Alter Rebbe is telling us what happened by Kriyas Yamsuf, by the splitting of the sea, which Alter Rebbe is going to demonstrate to us that the creation of heaven and earth is a greater miracle yet than Kriyas Yamsuf, than the splitting of the sea. Because Alter Rebbe introduces into this an example which Torah testifies, similar to this which we spoke about, the ball, the example of the ball, that when you throw it upwards, it doesn't go up indefinitely, but it's the reason why it's doing contrary to its nature. It's because you imbue a certain strength into the ball, and the moment it minimizes, the ball goes back to its original nature. And the same thing over here. Water has the nature to flow, not to stand like a wall. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed that very nature of the water, that it, instead of flowing, which again would have endangered the lives of Am Yisrael, or they wouldn't be able to go forward, proceed, and Hashem decided it's going to stand up like a wall in order they should be able to proceed. So what did Hashem do? He blows this intense eastern wind on the water to change the very nature of the water in order to stand like a wall. When if Hashem would stop, would cease with that wind, the water would go right back to where it would be. So the Alter Rebbe is pointing out, if to change two natures, because of the phenomenon of something standing like in an upright position, solid, does exist within creation. It's not a total new concept. It's not a novelty within creation that something could stand an upright position. That we say, wow, that was the first time in history that everything flows, and all of a sudden something stood up like a wall. Am Yisrael just looked at the wall. They couldn't get their eyes off the wall. They never saw something standing in an upright position. No. Within creation there's stuff, there is material, there's the created entities within creation that do stand up like a wall, and then there's other parts of creation that flow. The difference of a solid wall, a stone, or example, water. Water flows, a stone stands an upright position. Stones don't flow. So Hashem ultimately had to just change two natures. A nature of something which flows, which is the water, to a nature of something which stands up, to something which stands in an upright position. So just to change from one nature to another, not to bring something new into being, because again, this phenomenon existed in other materials within creation. Water doesn't have that nature. So what did Hashem do ultimately? Just change one nature of one material within Elam Hazah, within the world, to another. And what did that take? It took that Hashem needed to pump a certain an intense eastern wind, again quoting from the pasuk, and it had to be exact in that measure, which would push on the water contrary to its nature, and eventually push it up that it should stand like a wall, that Am Yisrael should come through. And what if Hashem would have pulled back on that wind it would have come back to water, which would obviously endanger Am Yisrael, but Hashem was pumping that wind, Kol Alayla, the entire night. And then again, at the point that it had to kind of say yank itself up, that's when it happened, and Am Yisrael was able to come across. So when you compare to the creation of Elam Haza, creation of this world, the creation of the world is far beyond. And if this dependability of the energy which needs to constantly mahava machayim mekayim, bring life and existence, and the life, and vivify again every item, every detail of Elam Haza. Because if you're talking about a change of two natures, not a total new phenomenon, just a change of two natures, the nature of water to carry that nature or to express itself with the nature of a wall, Hashem had to constantly pump this wind, and if Hashem would stop, the nature of the water would go back to the way it which is again the nature of water which flows, and it would not stand like a wall, something which never existed to begin with. The world wasn't around prior to Hashem creating the world. Then Hashem brings in this new phenomenon of creation into being. Could you imagine how much Hashem has to constantly pump again, not only just a general wind which would bring creation to being, that specific energy which creates every specific item and material in this world exactly the way it appears, exactly the way it functions, and with its exact image and everything about it. And there's so many details which we learn today of the sophistication of any item which Hashem created, any material Hashem created. And you think about the totality of the world, the sophistication of the world which did not exist. It's not that there was just a one nature which Hashem has to change to another nature. It's a state of a non-existent entity to become an existent entity. Which tells us how much Hashem's connection to creation on a constant basis. And let's learn it inside. So when it comes to Kriyas Yamsuf, just again the change of two natures, even the nature within water, the water flows. It's something which is already, is Hashem created water with that nature. And it's again, Hashem brought that from a state of Ayin into a state of Yesh. In other words, the water was already is at that time, and at all times it's already a creation of Yesh Mi'ayin, but with that particular style, with that particular nature to flow. Because again, the whole phenomenon of something standing in an upright position is not a new phenomenon in creation. For a wall stands on its own without any wind. You don't have to blow in a wind that a solid wall should stand upright. It's teva ma'imenikin. It happens to be that, so to say, this outer, this veneer, or say veneer because they're both created beings of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. If it's a solid wall or if it's water, it happens to be that the nature of water, in other words, the one component, it's an important component, again, that's the makeup of the water, but nonetheless, it carries an additional being, what it is, again, a created being of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, has as well a nature that it flows, and it doesn't stand upright. So the concept of something standing upright is already pre-existed, in other words, exists within creation, existed then within creation. It happens to be the water doesn't have this nature. And yet, for a Kodesh Baruch Hu just to change one, so to say, outer veneer, it's not totally outer, we do agree. It's something very much part of the make of the water that it flows. But again, the water, there's two dimensions to the water. The fact that the water is a created being, and then on top of that, the very nature of the water. And it's on top of that. Because, again, everything, there's the common denominator between everything, that once it comes into being, so it's there. But everything has its unique nature. So when you take the nature of water, which is, again, so to say, a particular veneer, a particular style within the water, and you want to change that should stand up like an upright wall, look what Hashem had to do, Kaviyachol. Hashem had to blow, he had to. I mean, the way the evolution of Kriyas Yamsuf, the Torah testifies that Hashem blew this intense wind to do what? To change one nature to another nature, that flowing water should stand in upright position. And if Hashem would pull back, it would just fall back to its original state. When you're creating a world which never existed, it wasn't that there was something with one style, and Hashem had to change that style to another style. The world did not exist. There wasn't just a change of a particular natural component within creation that Hashem changed to another natural component. Another one style to another. And that itself we see when Hashem needs to change one nature to another. You see there had to be the intense wind pumping onto the water or blowing on the water, kol halayla. If not, everything would go back to the way it would revert to its original nature. But the world is not like that. The world did not exist prior to creation, which is way beyond just changing from one style to another, one nature to one expression, natural expression to another. Which is beyond nature to begin with. And a greater wonder, and this is a double expression of wonder, wonder of wonders, more than Kriyas Yamsuf. If Kriyas Yamsuf is called a Pele, as it is, creation of heaven and earth, is Hafle Vofele, is wonder on top of wonders, more than the wonders of Kriyas Yamsuf. Alachas kama v'kama, much more so. Should be stalkus kechapeiru b'ad nivra, chas v'sholom yosher nivra la'im v'efes. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if there would be the removal of the energy of the Creator from the creation, God forbid, creation would return to a state of complete nothingness. There has to be the constant energy of the maker in this which is being made, the pile in the nifal, the creator in the created being, lach yese, to give it life, ulekaime, and to give it existence. And these are the these are the energy of the 10 sayings with which creation was originally created. And as Alter Rebbe explained in Perek Aleph, that not only they were created then, but they're constantly created. They're constantly being created on a constant basis. So the same energy which created heaven and earth then, that same energy, that same Asarim Amores, continue to create and bring everything into existence in its exact form, its exact shape, its exact manner. And it's just like in the beginning of creation, before Hashem, for example, created the stone did not exist. In essence, if Hashem would stop creating that very stone, the stone would turn to a state of complete nothingness, to its pre-state of non-existence, and therefore creation is being constantly created from those same Asar Mamaris, the same 10 sayings Hashem created then. Hashem constantly creates now. And that again demonstrates that not only connection, the total dependability of Olam with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when we speak about divine providence, getting back to Alter Rebbe's message, when we speak about divine providence as an example, any miracle Hashem performs, it's not something which there is even a question, because it's not Hashem has to tune out from one thing and get involved into something else, and how much you get involved. It's been so many years, thousands of years since his involvement with creation. It's not so. And therefore, divine providence is obvious. Hashem's performing miracles. We can appreciate so much more when we say Hashem performs a miracle. He's not tuning out of something that he has to remember about that creation he created over 5,000 years ago. It's not at all so. Hashem is right now creating and pumping energy into creation. In other words, recreating, revivifying, revitalizing creation every single moment. So there's no comparison to any craftsman producing any type of craft, any type of production. And again, this becomes the basis to which the Alter Rebbe the error. He says that's the difference. That's the error. The error of the heretic, the heresy. Those who denied any Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. The basis, their whole basis, is erroneous, and as such, once we see that stark difference, we have no questions in Hashgacha Pratis, we have no questions in the Isis of Meifsei HaTorah. Have a wonderful night.